Hello students, this is Mrs. Evans. I apologize that I have to come to you through video. My foot is worse than I was expecting. I have a doctor's appointment tomorrow, so I will be out today and tomorrow. And I feel like I'm abandoning you. I feel so bad at the beginning of the school year here. Well, we're trying to get to know each other and I'm not available. I do apologize sincerely. However, as I told you, if I'm out, we are still moving forward. This is today's lesson, whether I'm in the room or not. So, on Thursday, we started with square roots. We said it was the division sign with an attitude. We said that its job was to cancel squaring, the inverse of squaring. So here we have 8 squared is 64. And the square root of 8 squared, also known as the square root of 64, it's canceling that squaring. So we get 8. The square root of 64 is 8. Okay, so, sorry, I'm getting messages from people about me being out today. So there's a couple more pieces to this. Now that we understand that we're finding the root, basically, if we give you the side length, then when I square something, you're giving me the area, right? 5 by 5 is 25. This is squaring. And if you're taking the square root, I'm giving you the area, and you're giving me the side length. Okay, so to take the square root is saying you're giving me the root of the square. Okay? So they're inverses of each other. Okay, so there's 2 pieces to this. We need to look at how we handle when the value is negative. So we need to talk about the difference between this and this. They are very, very different. And then we also need to talk about how square roots are actually come from they have 2 different solutions. And so we're going to talk about that next. But for now, we're going to talk about the difference between negative 60, square root of 64 and the square root of negative 64. So remember, we have this square, and we're saying what 2 identical factors multiply to make me. So if the answer was 8 times 8, that would be 64. If the solution was negative 8 times negative 8, well, that also equals a positive 64. So how do I answer then, Miss Evans, when I know that I am taking the square root of positive 64? I thought I'd just say 8. Typically, yes, this is called the principal root. This is the principal root. It is the LE. The principal root is the positive root. However, if you are asked what number when squared is equal to 64, remember when we were doing these in equations? And we took the square root of both sides? Well, that results in 2 different possible solutions. So this cancels this and you get x. And you would say, well, this cancels 8 squared, but it also cancels negative 8 squared. What do I mean by that? Meaning there's 2 different answers. The answer is 8, because 8 squared equals 64. But the answer is also negative 8, because negative 8, when squared, is also positive 64. So let's do that some more. When I ask what number, that's what x means, right? Some number, when squared, results in positive 16. Well, we know that 4 squared equals 16. And we also know that negative 4 when squared, negative 4 times negative 4, is also equal to positive 16. So when we answer this, x squared is equal to positive 16, we have to take the square root of both sides. And that cancels that. And we get x is equal to plus or minus 4. Now that's a new symbol there for you. Okay, that plus minus sign. That represents two different numbers at once. What you're saying is x is equal to positive 4 and x is equal to negative 4. So instead of writing all that out, you can write it in one answer. X equals plus minus 4. That is two different numbers wrapped up in one. That's not a new number. Okay, so let's try one more. So if we had, okay, what's the square root of 81? Here we would simply answer 9. But if we were asked what number when squared is 81, well, the answer is 9 squared is 81 and negative 9 squared is 81. So when you take the square root of both sides, you will get that x is equal to plus or minus 9. So you might say, well, Mrs. Evans, I'm not sure, this is really new and I'm not sure how I should answer this. Either one is acceptable. If you would prefer, you could even do it this way. What you have to do is indicate that there are two possible solutions. And so all three of these methods indicate that there are two possible solutions. Again, here, if you have the radical, you typically just give one answer, the principal root. Now, I'll be honest, I just learned this clarification, I'll call it, when I came back to teaching math just a few years ago. So I went most of my life not keeping this straight, and you'll be fine. All you need to know is that the square root of 81 is 9, okay? So most of the time when they ask, just give the principal root. And especially on assessments, they will say things like, what's the square root of 25? And they'll say, select all that apply. Oops. And even though, again, this didn't ask for a principal root, there's no x equals or x squared equals involved. If they have 5, 15, negative 5, 20, I mean, you can certainly say this is true, okay? A lot of times they will do it looking like this. X squared equals 25. Select all that apply. Okay? But just know that there are always two solutions to a square root, but typically you want to give the principal root. Okay? And then when there's an x involved, we typically have two answers. Okay, because they're asking for all possible solutions. So, on that note, what happens if you have a negative number? Well, what two identical numbers multiply to make 25? Well, 5 times 5 or negative 5 times negative 5 also equals positive 25. But what if try that again, Evans. Sorry, tripping over my tongue. What if they're asking for the square root of negative 25? Well, then kids want to do this. And that's wrong. Because again, that's not two identical numbers. For a square, we know both sides have to be the exact same side length. And those would not be the exact same side length. So positive times a negative is a negative 25, but we have to have two identical numbers that multiply to make negative 25, and we can't. So that's the answer, is this cannot be done. There is a whole different number system for this that we're not going to get into. You get into it in Algebra 2. Okay, there's a way to handle this, but this cannot be done. You cannot take the square root of a negative number because there are no two identical numbers that multiply to make a negative. Okay, so it cannot be done. But what if the negative is outside the square root? Well, there we're good because this is really -1 times the square root of 25. That's what that really says, is there's a -1 groups of the square root of 25, and we know that the square root of 25, again, principal root, is 5. So what you're really saying is -1 times 5, which is, right, -5. Okay? So as long as the negative sign is outside of the radical, remember PEMDAS says, do exponents first, then multiply. And so this works fine. What cannot happen is this. You cannot take the square root of a negative number. It just cannot be done. Okay? So we've handled two sets of things today. We've handled the idea that there are two types of answers, that there's a principal root, and that you can have two solutions here for square roots, both a positive and a negative. We've introduced the plus minus sign, and we've also addressed whether not you can take the square root of a negative number, which again, as long as the negative sign is outside the radical, you're fine, a la this. And if it's inside, it does not work. So let's do a quiz real quick. Let's say, what is the square, what number when squared is 100? So hopefully you say, okay, I take the square root of both sides because I got to cancel the squaring. And I get that x is equal to 10 and -10. And again, you can write it that way. You can write it this way. And you can write it, what was the other way? Oh, x equals 10 and x equals -10. All three different ways to express that, okay? Let's try the next one. What is the square root of -9? What two identical numbers will multiply to make -9? Well, the answer is that cannot be done. Okay, and then last but not least, what is the square root of 121 but negative? And so that would be -1 times 11, which is -11.